The blood on Rebecca's dress was still wet when Priscilla Easton realized her own fate would be worse than death if she didn't run. Her sister lay crumpled on the wooden floor of their father's trading post in Palisade, Colorado, her lips split open and her eye already swelling shut, while Marcus Thornhill stood over her, flexing his bruised knuckles with the casual air of a man who had done nothing more troublesome than swat a fly. It was April of 1876, and Priscilla had just turned 19 years old enough to understand that the promises made between her father and this monster were about to transfer from Rebecca to her. "That one's got too much spirit," Marcus said, spitting tobacco juice onto the floor near Rebecca's face. "I'll take the younger one instead. She looks more biddable." Priscilla's father, Theodore Easton, wrung his hands and nodded with the enthusiasm of a man desperate to settle his gambling debts. "Priscilla's a good girl, quiet. She'll make you a fine wife, Marcus. The wedding can be next month, just as we planned, just with a different bride." Rebecca whimpered from the floor, and Priscilla knelt beside her, pressing a cloth to her sister's bleeding mouth. "Hush now," she whispered, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had watched her sister court Marcus for 3 months, had seen the way Rebecca's smiles grew more strained with each passing week, had noticed the bruises that appeared on her sister's arms that Rebecca explained away as clumsiness. But this was different. This was Marcus showing his true nature before the wedding, and their father was too deep in debt to care. "I won't marry him," Priscilla said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I won't." Her father's face went red. "You'll do as you're told, girl. Marcus here has been generous enough to forgive a considerable sum of money I owe him, and in return, he gets a wife. It was supposed to be Rebecca, but if he wants you instead, then you'll marry him and be grateful for it." Marcus crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed Priscilla's arm, yanking her to her feet. His breath smelled like whiskey and rot. "You'll learn your place soon enough. I like a bit of fire in a woman, but only until I've had the pleasure of putting it out." That night, while her father snored off his drink and Marcus returned to his ranch outside town, Priscilla packed what little she could carry in a worn leather satchel. Rebecca, her face swollen and discolored, pressed what money she had into Priscilla's hands. "Go north," Rebecca whispered through her damaged mouth. "Head into the mountains. There are trappers and mountain men up there who don't care about father's debts or Marcus's claims. Find someone to help you, or at least find somewhere to hide." "Come with me," Priscilla pleaded, but Rebecca shook her head. "I can barely walk, and I'd slow you down. Marcus will come looking for you at first light. You need to be far from here by then." Rebecca gripped her sister's hands. "Promise me you'll find a better life than this. Promise me you won't let that monster touch you." Priscilla promised, kissed her sister's bruised forehead, and slipped out into the Colorado night. The mountains loomed dark and forbidding against the star-scattered sky as Priscilla followed the narrow trails northward. She had never been this far from Palisade, had never spent a night outside the safety of walls and a roof. Every sound made her jump, every shadow seemed to hide some predator. She walked for hours until her feet blistered and her legs trembled with exhaustion, but fear drove her onward. Marcus would come after her. Men like him didn't let go of what they considered theirs, and her father had promised her to him as surely as if she were a piece of livestock. Dawn broke cold and gray over the mountain peaks, and Priscilla found herself following a stream upward into territory she didn't recognize. The April air was thin and sharp in her lungs, and frost still clung to the shadowed places where sunlight hadn't yet reached. She had no plan beyond putting distance between herself and Marcus Thornhill. She had no idea how to survive in this wilderness, no knowledge of which plants were safe to eat or how to build a fire without matches that had grown damp in her satchel. By midday, she heard the sound of horses behind her. Panic seized her throat as she scrambled off the trail and into a dense thicket of pine trees. Through the branches she watched 3 riders pass, Marcus in the lead with his hat pulled low and his rifle across his saddle. Her father rode beside him, looking miserable and hungover, and a third man she didn't recognize brought up the rear. "She can't have gone far," Marcus called out. "Stupid girl probably doesn't even know how to survive out here. We'll find her before nightfall, and when we do, I'll make sure she understands what happens to women who run from their obligations." They rode past her hiding spot, and Priscilla remained frozen until the sound of hoofbeats faded into silence. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. They were hunting her like an animal, and she had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The mountains that had seemed like salvation now felt like a trap, vast and empty and utterly indifferent to whether she lived or died. She forced herself to move deeper into the forest, away from the trail. If she stayed near the paths, they would find her. Her only hope was to lose herself in the wilderness and pray that Marcus would eventually give up the search. But as the day wore on and the temperature dropped, Priscilla began to understand how foolish that hope was. She had no shelter, no food, no water except what she could scoop from the icy streams. Night would come again, colder than the last, and she had no way to keep warm. As the sun sank toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Priscilla stumbled into a small clearing. Her vision was blurring from exhaustion and hunger, and her hands were numb with cold. She had lost all sense of direction hours ago. For all she knew, she was walking in circles, and Marcus would find her frozen body come morning. That was when she saw the cabin. It was small and rough-hewn, built from logs and chinked with mud, with a stone chimney from which a thin stream of smoke rose into the darkening sky. A lean-to shelter stood nearby, housing 2 horses and a mule. Priscilla's heart leaped with desperate hope. Someone lived here, someone who might help her or at least give her shelter for the night. She stumbled toward the door and raised her fist to knock, but before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. The man who filled the doorway was the largest human being Priscilla had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly touched both sides of the doorframe. His chest and arms were thick with muscle clearly visible beneath his buckskin shirt, and his hands looked like they could snap a man's neck without effort. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. His eyes, a startling shade of blue-gray, fixed on her with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step backward. "Please," she managed to say, her voice cracking. "I need help." The mountain man's gaze swept over her, taking in her torn dress, her bleeding feet, the wild terror in her eyes. His expression didn't change, but he stepped aside and jerked his head toward the interior of the cabin. "Get inside before you freeze to death." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel underfoot, but not unkind. Priscilla hesitated only a moment before stumbling past him into the warmth of the cabin. Heat from the fireplace washed over her like a blessing, and she swayed on her feet. The mountain man caught her elbow with surprising gentleness, guiding her to a chair near the fire. "Sit," he commanded, and she obeyed, too exhausted to do anything else. He moved about the cabin with economical efficiency, pouring water from a kettle into a tin cup and pressing it into her hands. "Drink this, slowly." Priscilla sipped the warm water, feeling it thaw the ice in her veins. The cabin was sparse but clean, with a bed in one corner, a small table, shelves lined with supplies and furs hanging from the walls. The smell of wood smoke and leather and something cooking in a pot over the fire filled the air. It was the most welcome place she had ever been. "What's your name?" the mountain man asked, crouching down to examine her feet. His hands were enormous but careful as he unlaced her ruined boots. "Priscilla Easton," she said, wincing as he pulled the boots free. Her stockings were soaked with blood from the blisters that had burst and bled. "I'm Donovan Drake," he said, looking up at her with those penetrating eyes. "And you're being hunted." It wasn't a question. Priscilla nodded, tears suddenly spilling down her cheeks. "How did you know?" "A woman doesn't run into the mountains alone, bleeding and terrified, unless someone's after her." Donovan stood and moved to a shelf, returning with a tin of salve and strips of clean cloth. "I heard riders pass by this afternoon. 3 men, moving fast, searching for something. I'm guessing they were searching for you." "My father promised me to a man named Marcus Thornhill," Priscilla said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "But Marcus beat my sister, and when my father saw what he'd done, he didn't care. He told Marcus to take me instead. I couldn't marry him. I couldn't let him touch me, so I ran." Donovan's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck cording with tension. He knelt before her again and began cleaning her feet with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man his size. "This Marcus? He's the one hunting you?" "Yes. With my father and another man. They rode past where I was hiding this morning. Marcus said he'd find me before nightfall and make me understand what happens to women who run." Fresh tears came, hot and shameful. "I have nowhere to go. I thought if I could just get far enough away, they'd give up, but I don't know these mountains. I don't know how to survive out here." Donovan applied the salve to her wounds, his touch sure and practiced. "These mountains will kill you if you don't know what you're doing. You were right to seek shelter." He began wrapping her feet in the cloth strips. "But those men will keep searching. Men like that don't give up easily." "I know," Priscilla whispered. "I'm sorry to bring trouble to your door. I'll leave at first light. I promise. I just needed somewhere warm for one night." Donovan finished bandaging her feet and stood, looking down at her with an unreadable expression. "You're not leaving. Not until you're healed, and not until we've dealt with the men hunting you." Hope and fear warred in Priscilla's chest. "You'd help me? But you don't even know me." "I know enough." Donovan moved to the pot over the fire and ladled stew into a wooden bowl. He handed it to her along with a spoon. "Eat, then sleep. We'll talk more in the morning." The stew was simple but delicious, rich with meat and root vegetables. Priscilla ate ravenously, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal since before she fled. Donovan watched her in silence, sitting in the other chair and cleaning his rifle with the methodical attention of a man who understood the importance of maintaining his tools. When she finished eating, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Donovan stood and gestured to the bed. "You'll sleep there. I'll take the floor." "I can't take your bed," Priscilla protested weakly. "You can and you will." His tone left no room for argument. He spread furs on the floor near the fire and settled onto them with the ease of a man accustomed to hard sleeping. "Rest now. You're safe here." Priscilla wanted to believe him, but safety felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. Still, her body had reached its limits. She lay down on the bed, which smelled of pine and leather and something distinctly masculine that made her feel strangely comforted. Within moments, she was asleep. She woke to the sound of voices outside the cabin. Gray morning light filtered through the small window, and the fire had burned down to embers. Donovan was already awake, standing near the door with his rifle in hand. He held up one hand in a silent command for her to remain quiet, and Priscilla's heart began to hammer in her chest. "Anyone inside?" a man's voice called out. It was Marcus. "We're looking for a runaway girl, Priscilla Easton. She's promised to me in marriage, but she got scared and ran off. Her father and I are worried sick about her." Donovan's expression didn't change. He set the rifle within easy reach and opened the door, stepping outside. Priscilla couldn't see what was happening, but she could hear every word. "Morning," Donovan said, his voice flat and unrevealing. "Burr. Morning to you," Marcus replied, his tone falsely friendly. "Name's Marcus Thornhill. This here is Theodore Easton and his associate James Webb. Like I said, we're looking for a young woman, about 19 years old, dark hair, probably scared out of her wits. You seen anyone like that?" "These mountains are full of animals, not people," Donovan said. "Haven't seen anyone in weeks." "That's so?" Marcus's voice took on an edge. "Well, if you do happen to see her, you bring her down to Palisade. Her father's offering a reward for her safe return." "Noted," Donovan said. There was a long pause. Then her father's voice, wheedling and desperate. "Please, sir, if you've seen my daughter, tell us. She's not right in the head sometimes. She could die out here." "Like I said, I haven't seen anyone." Donovan's tone remained unchanged, hard as the mountain stone. "Mind if we take a look inside your cabin?" Marcus asked. "Just to put our minds at ease." "Yes, I mind." Donovan's voice dropped to something dangerous. "This is my land, my cabin. You've got no right to search it, and I've got no patience for men who try to push where they're not welcome." "Now see here," Marcus started, but Donovan cut him off. "You see here, I've told you I haven't seen your runaway bride. Now you've got two choices. You can take me at my word and ride on, or you can try to force your way into my home and find out what happens to men who make that mistake. Choose." The silence that followed was taut as a bowstring. Priscilla held her breath, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. She heard the creak of saddle leather, the stamping of horses, and then Marcus's voice, cold with fury. "We'll be on our way then. But if I find out you've been lying to me, Mountain Man, I'll be back, and I won't be so polite next time." "Looking forward to it," Donovan said, and Priscilla heard the door close. She waited, trembling, until Donovan returned inside. His expression was grim. They're gone, but they'll be watching the trails. Marcus doesn't believe me. Why did you lie for me? Priscilla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You could have just handed me over. It would have been easier. Donovan moved to stoke the fire, adding fresh wood until flames leaped up again. I've met men like Marcus Thornhill before. Men who think they own everything and everyone around them. Men who use their fists to keep people in line. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were hard as flint. I don't help men like that. Not ever. He'll come back, Priscilla said. You know he will. Probably. Donovan poured water into a pot and set it over the fire to heat. But by the time he does, you'll be stronger and we'll be ready. Over the following days, Priscilla learned what it meant to live in the high mountains of Colorado. Donovan was a patient teacher, showing her how to identify edible plants, how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the birds. He taught her to shoot, first with his smaller pistol, and then, when her hands grew steadier, with the rifle. You need to be able to defend yourself, he said as she practiced aiming at a target he'd set up near the tree line. I won't always be here to protect you. But he was always there, a constant presence that was both comforting and unsettling. Priscilla found herself watching him when he worked, fascinated by the easy strength in his movements, the way his muscles flexed as he split wood or hauled water from the stream. He was a man completely at ease in this harsh environment, needing no one and nothing beyond what he could hunt, build, or grow himself. Yet, he was also kind in ways she hadn't expected. He made sure she ate first at every meal. He fashioned her a pair of proper boots from soft leather, measuring her feet with careful attention and stitching the seams with practiced skill. He never touched her without permission, never crowded her space, always gave her privacy when she needed it. At night, they sat by the fire and talked. Donovan told her about his life before the mountains, how he'd been a soldier in the war between the states, fighting for the Union until the carnage and senselessness of it all drove him to seek solitude. He'd come west in 1866, right after the war ended, and had been living alone in these mountains ever since. Don't you get lonely? Priscilla asked one evening as they sat together, the darkness pressing close around the cabin. Donovan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the flames. Lonely is better than being around people who bring nothing but pain and disappointment. I had my fill of humanity during the war, saw what men are capable of when they stop seeing each other as human. After that, the silence of the mountains felt like a blessing. Not all people are terrible, Priscilla said softly. He looked at her then, and something shifted in his expression. No, not all people. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Priscilla couldn't quite name. She found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a pull she didn't understand. Donovan's eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But instead he stood abruptly and announced he was going to check the perimeter. Priscilla sat alone by the fire, her heart racing, and wondered what was happening to her. She had fled one man who wanted to own her, only to find herself drawn to another who wanted nothing from her at all. But the feelings growing in her chest were nothing like the fear and revulsion Marcus had inspired. When she looked at Donovan, she felt safe, protected. And increasingly, she felt something warm and sweet that she was beginning to recognize as desire. 3 weeks after her arrival, Priscilla was helping Donovan repair a section of the lean-to when they heard horses approaching. Donovan's hand went immediately to the pistol at his hip, and he positioned himself between Priscilla and the direction of the sound. But the riders who emerged from the trees weren't Marcus and her father. They were 2 trappers Donovan knew, men named Samuel and Robert who worked the Northern Territories. "Donovan?" Samuel called out in greeting. "Didn't expect to find you with company." "Samuel? Robert?" Donovan relaxed slightly but didn't move from his protective stance. "What brings you this way?" "Heard there's trouble down in Palisade," Robert said, his eyes curious as they flicked to Priscilla and then back to Donovan. "Man named Marcus Thornhill has been telling anyone who'll listen that you're harboring his runaway bride. He's been recruiting men to come up here and take her back by force." Priscilla's stomach dropped. "How many men?" "Last we heard, about a dozen," Samuel said. "Thornhill's offering good money, and there's plenty of folks in Palisade who'd rather take his coin than ask questions about why a girl would run from him in the first place." Donovan's jaw clenched. "When?" Could be any day now, Robert said. We thought you'd want the warning. Appreciate it, Donovan said. After the trappers left, heading north toward their own territories, Donovan turned to Priscilla with an expression of grim determination. We need to make a choice. We can try to hold them off here, or we can run deeper into the mountains where they won't follow. Running just delays the inevitable, Priscilla said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Marcus won't give up. He'll keep hunting me until he finds me or until someone stops him. Then we stop him. Donovan moved to the cabin and began pulling weapons from a hidden cache beneath the floorboards. Rifles, pistols, ammunition, knives. Enough to equip a small army. We've got the advantage of position and preparation. If he wants a fight, we'll give him one. I can help, Priscilla said. You've taught me to shoot. I won't hide while you defend me. Donovan looked at her for a long moment, and something like pride flickered in his eyes. All right. But you follow my lead, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Donovan showed Priscilla the best defensive positions around the cabin, where to take cover, how to reload quickly, when to fire, and when to hold. He set tripwires around the perimeter that would give them warning of anyone approaching. He filled containers with water and stored them inside the cabin in case of a siege. At night, they sat together and Donovan told her about battles he'd fought, strategies he'd learned, mistakes that had cost good men their lives. Priscilla listened and absorbed everything, but she also found herself watching the way firelight played across his features, the strength in his hands, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. Donovan, she said on the second night, interrupting a story about Gettysburg. Why are you doing this? You could have turned me away that first night. You could have given me to Marcus and avoided all this trouble. Why risk your life for me? He was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Because the first time I saw you standing at my door, bleeding and terrified and still fighting, something in me recognized something in you. I've been alone for 10 years and I thought I'd stay alone until I died. But you walked into my life, and I realized I don't want to be alone anymore. Not if it means being alone without you. Priscilla's breath caught in her throat. Donovan, You don't have to say anything, he interrupted gently. I'm not Marcus Thornhill. I'm not demanding anything from you. When this is over, if you want to leave, I'll help you get wherever you want to go. But if you want to stay... He paused, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. If you want to stay, I'd spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regretted it. Tears blurred Priscilla's vision. All her life, men had told her what to do, where to go, who to be. Her father had treated her like property, something to be traded for debt forgiveness. Marcus had seen her as a possession to be controlled and broken, but Donovan was offering her something no man ever had, a choice, the freedom to decide her own future. I don't want to leave, she whispered. I want to stay here, with you. The smile that spread across Donovan's face transformed him, softening the hard edges and revealing a gentleness she had glimpsed only in moments. He cupped her face in his large hands, his touch reverent. Then stay with me, and I swear I'll protect you with everything I have. He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she were something precious that might break. Priscilla melted into him, her hands finding the solid warmth of his chest, feeling the steady thunder of his heartbeat beneath her palms. The kiss deepened and heat bloomed through her body, a sweet ache that made her press closer to him. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Donovan rested his forehead against hers. We should rest. They could come tomorrow. But Priscilla didn't want to rest. She didn't want to waste a single moment of the time they had. Donovan, I don't know how to... Understanding dawned in his eyes. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm despite her inexperience. I'm ready because it's you, because I choose you. Donovan kissed her again, hungrier this time, and Priscilla surrendered to the feeling of being wanted not for what she represented or what she could provide, but simply for being herself. He was gentle with her, patient and caring, showing her pleasures she had never imagined. And when they finally came together, skin against skin, heartbeat to heartbeat, Priscilla understood what it meant to give yourself to someone freely, without fear or coercion. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, Priscilla's head resting on his broad chest while his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "No matter what happens tomorrow," she whispered into the darkness, "I want you to know I love you." Donovan's arms tightened around her. "I love you too, and I promise you, nothing and no one is going to take you from me." They came at dawn, just as Donovan had predicted. Priscilla woke to his hand over her mouth, his whispered warning in her ear. "They're here. 12 riders coming from the south. Get dressed and take your position." Her heart hammered as she pulled on her clothes and grabbed the rifle Donovan had prepared for her. Through the window she could see men spreading out around the clearing, surrounding the cabin. Marcus sat on his horse at the front, his face twisted with fury. "Donovan Drake!" he called out. "Send out my bride and I'll let you live. Keep her and I'll burn that cabin to the ground with both of you inside." Donovan stepped out onto the small porch, his rifle cradled in his arms. "The lady doesn't want to go with you, Thornhill. Time you accepted that and rode on." "The lady doesn't have a choice," Marcus snarled. "Her father promised her to me, and I've paid good money for that promise. She's mine by right." "People aren't property," Donovan said, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "And rights don't include beating women into submission." Marcus's hand moved toward his gun, but Donovan was faster. A shot rang out, kicking up dirt directly in front of Marcus's horse. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider. "That was a warning," Donovan said. "The next one won't be. You and your men have until the count of 10 to get off my land. 1. "You can't fight all of us," Marcus shouted. 2. Several of the hired men shifted nervously in their saddles. They had been paid to intimidate, not to die for some other man's wounded pride. 3. "Get him!" Marcus yelled, drawing his pistol. Chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from multiple directions as Marcus's men opened fire on the cabin. Donovan dropped behind the cover of a water trough, returning fire with devastating accuracy. Priscilla sighted down her rifle from the window, her hands steady despite her racing heart. She fired at a man trying to flank around to the side of the cabin, and he yelped in pain as the bullet grazed his arm. The tripwires Donovan had set did their work. 2 men went down, tangled in rope and wire, easy targets. Donovan picked them off with shots that disarmed rather than killed, sending weapons flying from hands. He was giving them chances to retreat, to recognize this fight wasn't worth their lives. Some took the opportunity. 3 riders wheeled their horses and fled back down the trail. 2 more followed when Donovan's next shots came close enough to part their hair. But Marcus and his core group, including Priscilla's father and 4 others clearly determined to earn their pay, kept up the assault. A bullet punched through the cabin wall near Priscilla's head, showering her with splinters. She ducked down, her breath coming in sharp gasps, but forced herself to reload and return to the window. She could see her father crouched behind a tree, firing wildly toward the cabin. The sight of him filled her with a cold rage. He had sold her to a monster and was now trying to kill the man who had saved her. "Father!" she shouted. "Stop this! Just leave!" Theodore Easton's face appeared around the tree, shocked to hear her voice. "Priscilla, come out here right now. You're shaming this family. You shamed this family when you promised me to a man who beats women," she screamed back. "I'll die before I marry Marcus Thornhill." A bullet from Donovan's rifle struck the tree inches from her father's head, and Theodore scrambled backward. Marcus, seeing his assault faltering, made a desperate decision. He spurred his horse forward, charging directly at the cabin with his gun blazing. Donovan stepped out from cover, standing fully exposed in the line of fire. Time seemed to slow as he raised his rifle, took careful aim, and fired. The shot hit Marcus's gun hand, shattering bone and sending the pistol spinning away. Marcus howled in pain and rage, but his horse's momentum carried him forward until he was almost at the porch. Then Donovan was on him, dragging him from the saddle and slamming him into the ground. The mountain man's fist connected with Marcus's jaw with a sound like an axe splitting wood. Marcus struggled, trying to fight back, but he was no match for Donovan's size and fury. A second punch, then a third, and Marcus went limp, unconscious. "Anyone else?" Donovan roared, looking around at the remaining men. Blood ran from a graze on his arm, but he stood like an avenging angel, terrifying and magnificent. "Anyone else want to try taking her?" The remaining men threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Theodore Easton emerged from behind his tree, his face pale and his hands trembling. "She's my daughter," he said weakly. "I have rights." Donovan picked up Marcus's pistol and leveled it at Theodore. You gave up your rights when you sold her to this piece of filth. Now you've got a choice. You can get on your horse and ride back to Palisade, and you can tell everyone there that Priscilla Easton is dead. You can mourn her and move on with your life. Or you can keep fighting me for her, and I promise you won't walk away from this clearing alive. Theodore looked at his daughter, still visible in the cabin window with her rifle, and something in his face crumbled. Perhaps it was shame, perhaps simply the recognition that he had lost. "Rebecca," he said hoarsely, "your sister needs you." "Then you take care of her," Priscilla said coldly. "You be the father to her you should have been to both of us, and you stay away from me. I'm dead to you, remember?" Theodore nodded slowly, climbed onto his horse with the defeated movements of a broken man, and rode away. The other hired men followed, two of them carrying the groaning, barely conscious Marcus between them. When the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely, Donovan lowered the pistol and turned back to the cabin. Priscilla met him at the door, and they held each other while the adrenaline drained away, leaving them both shaking. "It's over," Donovan murmured into her hair. "They won't come back." "How can you be sure?" "Because I know men like that. They're bullies and cowards. We bloodied them and humiliated them. Marcus will be too ashamed to show his face, and your father will be too guilty. They'll leave us alone." Priscilla pulled back to look at his face, at the cut on his cheekbone and the blood on his arm. "You're hurt." "Scratches," he dismissed. "You did well. You were brave and steady. I'm proud of you." Those simple words of praise broke something open inside her, and she started to cry. Donovan held her through it, patient and strong, until she had no tears left. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal. Donovan healed quickly from his minor wounds. Priscilla helped him repair the damage to the cabin, and they fell into an easy rhythm of work and companionship. But something fundamental had shifted between them. They had fought together, bled together, and emerged victorious. The bond that formed was deeper than simple attraction or even love. It was partnership, forged in fire. One morning, as they sat outside watching the sun rise over the mountains, Donovan took her hand. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but I meant what I said before. I want you to stay with me, not just for now, but forever." Priscilla smiled. "Are you asking me to marry you, Donovan Drake?" "I suppose I am." He looked almost nervous, this big, powerful man who had single-handedly fought off a dozen armed men. "I don't have much to offer you, just this cabin, these mountains, and a simple life. But I can promise you'll always be safe, always be cherished, and always be free to make your own choices." "Yes," Priscilla said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to you." They were married a month later by a traveling preacher who came through the high country performing services for the scattered population of trappers and miners. Samuel and Robert stood as witnesses, along with two other mountain families who lived within a day's ride. It was a simple ceremony, held outside the cabin with the mountains as their cathedral and the sky as their roof. Priscilla wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Donovan had traded for at a mining camp, simple but clean and white. Donovan wore his best buckskins and had trimmed his beard. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Donovan kissed her in front of their small gathering of friends, Priscilla felt a joy so complete it seemed to fill the entire valley. That night, they celebrated with a feast of venison and wild vegetables, and their guests danced to the music of a fiddle one of the miners played. When everyone had finally left or bedded down for the night, Donovan carried Priscilla over the threshold of their cabin, and they made love with the tenderness and passion of two people who had chosen each other freely and completely. The months passed, marked by the changing seasons. Summer brought warm days and cool nights, and Priscilla learned to tend the small garden Donovan had planted. She learned to preserve meat and vegetables for the winter, to tan hides and sew clothing. Donovan taught her to track animals, to read the signs of weather in the wind and clouds, to survive in conditions that would kill most people from the settlements. But he also showed her the beauty of the mountains, taking her to hidden valleys where wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion, to crystal-clear lakes where they could see fish swimming in the depths, to overlooks where the entire world seemed to spread out beneath them in magnificent grandeur. In September, Priscilla realized she was pregnant. She told Donovan one evening as they sat by the fire, and the look of wonder and joy on his face was something she would treasure forever. "A baby," he said, his hand gentle on her still flat belly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He kissed her softly. "You've given me everything I didn't know I was missing. A home, a wife, and now a child. I'm the luckiest man alive." Winter came hard that year, with deep snows and temperatures that plunged far below freezing. But the cabin was tight and warm, their stores were full, and Priscilla felt safer and more content than she had ever been in her life. Donovan doted on her as her belly grew, insisting she rest while he handled the heavy work, bringing her the choicest cuts of meat and the sweetest preserved fruits. One evening in late December, as a blizzard howled outside and they sat together by the fire, Priscilla asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Do you ever miss the settlements, other people, a life that's less isolated?" Donovan considered this, his arm around her shoulders and his hand resting on her pregnant belly. "There are things I miss sometimes, music, books, news from the wider world, but those are small things compared to what I have here. I have you. I have peace. I have freedom. And soon, I'll have our child. That's more than most men ever get." "I want to write to Rebecca," Priscilla said. "I want her to know I'm alive and happy. I want her to know she could come here if she needs to escape." "Then we'll arrange it," Donovan said. "When the spring thaw comes, I'll go down to one of the trading posts and send a letter for you. But carefully. We can't risk Marcus finding out where we are." In March, when the worst of the winter had passed, Donovan made good on his promise. He rode down to a trading post 3 days away, posted Priscilla's letter, and returned with supplies and news. Rebecca had written back immediately, care of the trading post, expressing her relief and joy that Priscilla was alive. She wrote that Marcus had left Palisade in disgrace after his failed attempt to reclaim his bride, his hand crippled and his reputation ruined. Their father had fallen deeper into drink and gambling, and Rebecca was managing the trading post as best she could. "She sounds lonely," Priscilla said, reading the letter for the 3rd time. "Maybe when the baby is born and I'm strong enough, we could bring her up here for a visit." "Whatever you want," Donovan said. "This is your home too. You decide who's welcome in it." Their son was born in early May, on a morning when the world outside was bursting with new life. Donovan delivered the baby himself, his large hands steady and sure as he guided the child into the world. When he placed the squalling, red-faced infant on Priscilla's chest, she felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it took her breath away. "He's perfect," she whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "What should we name him?" Donovan asked, his voice thick with emotion. Priscilla thought of her journey, of running through the mountains in terror, of finding sanctuary in the most unexpected place. "Daniel," she said, "it means God is my judge, because no matter what anyone else thought about my choices, I knew in my heart I was doing what was right." "Daniel Drake," Donovan said, testing the name. "I like it." Rebecca came to visit when Daniel was 3 months old, making the long journey with a guide Donovan had arranged through the trading post. The sisters' reunion was tearful and joyful, and Rebecca was amazed by the life Priscilla had built in the mountains. "You look so happy," Rebecca said, watching Priscilla nurse the baby while Donovan prepared dinner. "I worried you'd be miserable out here, so far from everything." "I have everything I need," Priscilla said simply. "A husband who loves me, a healthy son, and freedom. What else could I want?" Rebecca stayed for 2 weeks, and in that time, Priscilla saw her sister begin to heal from the trauma Marcus had inflicted. The mountain air and the peace of the cabin seemed to restore something in Rebecca that had been broken. She laughed more easily, slept better, and the haunted look gradually faded from her eyes. When it was time for her to leave, Rebecca hugged Priscilla tightly. "Thank you for showing me that there's another way to live, that not all men are like Marcus or father." "Come back whenever you need to," Priscilla said. "You'll always have a home here." The years flowed by like the streams running down from the high peaks. Daniel grew strong and healthy, learning to walk on sturdy legs and to talk in sentences that delighted his parents. Priscilla and Donovan added 2 more children to their family, a daughter they named Patricia, born when Daniel was 2, and another son named David, who arrived when Patricia was 3. The cabin expanded as the family grew, with Donovan building additional rooms and a larger sleeping loft. They added more livestock, a bigger garden, and even a small library of books Donovan traded for at the posts. Life was hard work, but it was good work, meaningful and rewarding. Rebecca visited every summer, and on her fourth visit, she brought a surprise. A quiet, steady man named Thomas who worked as a blacksmith in a settlement 2 days north of Palisade. He had courted Rebecca slowly and respectfully, winning her trust with patience and kindness. Priscilla could see the difference in her sister, the way Rebecca looked at Thomas with affection rather than fear, the way she smiled freely now. They were married the following spring in a ceremony at the cabin, and Priscilla stood as Rebecca's witness, just as Rebecca had stood as hers all those years ago. It felt like a circle completing, a healing of old wounds. On a warm evening in June of 1886, exactly 10 years after Priscilla had stumbled to Donovan's door, bleeding and terrified, the family gathered outside to watch the sunset. Daniel, now 9 years old, was teaching his younger siblings to skip stones on the stream. Patricia, at 7, was determined to beat her older brother's record. David, at 4, simply enjoyed throwing rocks as hard as he could. Priscilla sat with her back against Donovan's chest, his arms wrapped around her, watching their children play. "Did you ever imagine your life would turn out like this?" she asked. "Never," Donovan said, his voice warm with contentment. "I thought I'd die alone up here, and I was fine with that. But you changed everything. You brought life and love and laughter into my world. You gave me a family and a future." "We gave each other those things," Priscilla corrected. "I was running from a nightmare, and you showed me what life could be when you're with someone who truly sees you and values you. Everything good in my life started the night you opened your door to me." Donovan kissed the top of her head. "Do you ever regret it? The hardships, the isolation, the hard work?" Priscilla turned in his arms to look at him directly. The years had added some silver to his dark hair and a few more lines around his eyes, but he was still the strong, capable man who had protected her and loved her without reservation. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, it's everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dared to dream." "Mama, Papa, watch this," Daniel called out, and they turned to see him skip a stone an impressive 7 times across the water. "Well done," Donovan called back, his pride evident. As the sun sank behind the western peaks, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Priscilla reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been promised to a man who beat her sister, had run in terror through mountains she didn't know, had found sanctuary with a stranger who became her everything. The scars from those early days had faded, but not disappeared, reminders of how precious her freedom and safety truly were. But those scars were overshadowed by the beautiful life she had built with Donovan. Their children were growing up strong and free, learning to respect the land and each other, understanding that love was about choice and partnership, not ownership and control. They were writing a different story than the one that had been planned for Priscilla, a story of hope and healing and happiness, earned through courage and trust. That night, after the children were asleep in the loft and the cabin was quiet, Donovan and Priscilla lay together in their bed, talking softly about their plans for the coming season. They needed to expand the garden again, repair the roof on the lean-to, and make another trip to the trading post for supplies. But beneath the practical talk was a deeper current of gratitude and love. They had built something rare and precious in these mountains, a life completely their own, untainted by the expectations and cruelties of the world they had left behind. They had created a sanctuary where their children could grow up knowing they were valued for who they were, not what they could provide to others. "I love you," Priscilla whispered in the darkness. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Donovan replied, pulling her closer. "My fierce, brave, beautiful wife. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing us." Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to countless human stories of struggle and survival, heartbreak and triumph. But in the small cabin nestled in the valley, the Drake family had written their own story, one of love conquering fear, of healing overcoming trauma, of 2 wounded souls finding wholeness in each other. Priscilla drifted off to sleep in Donovan's arms, safe and cherished, surrounded by the family they had created together. She had been promised to a man who beat her sister, but a mountain man had made sure she would be his instead. And in making that choice, in fighting for that future, they had both found something neither had expected. A love that would last forever, strong as the mountains themselves, and just as enduring. The years continued to roll forward, bringing their share of challenges and changes. When Daniel turned 12, Donovan began teaching him in earnest how to trap and hunt, how to read the land and survive in the wilderness. The boy took to the lessons with natural aptitude, showing the same quiet competence his father possessed. Patricia proved to have a gift for healing, learning from her mother how to use herbs and plants to treat common ailments. David, the youngest, was the most adventurous of the three, always eager to explore new trails and climb higher peaks. Rebecca and Thomas visited regularly, and eventually they moved to a small homestead only a day's ride away, close enough for frequent visits but far enough to maintain their independence. They had 3 children of their own, and the cousins grew up together, running wild through the mountain valleys in summer and gathering for storytelling around the fire in winter. Theodore Easton died in 1889, his liver destroyed by years of heavy drinking. Rebecca sent word through the trading post, and Priscilla felt a complicated mix of emotions: relief that he could no longer cause harm, sadness for what might have been if he had been a different man, and gratitude that she had escaped his control before it was too late. Marcus Thornhill disappeared from all records around the same time, and rumors suggested he had moved to California and died in a saloon brawl. Priscilla felt nothing but relief when she heard the news. The monster who had haunted her nightmares was gone, and she was free even from the small shadow he had cast over her happiness. As the children grew older and more independent, Priscilla and Donovan found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They took long walks through the mountains, revisiting the places that had become special to them over the years. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the stars emerge in the vast sky above. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Donovan surprised Priscilla with a gift he had been working on in secret for months: a beautiful rocking chair carved from mountain maple, every curve and detail shaped with loving care. "For when we're old and gray," he said with a smile, "and we want to sit and rock our grandchildren." Priscilla ran her hands over the smooth wood, tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful. You're beautiful. This life we've built is beautiful." "It's not finished yet," Donovan said, pulling her into his arms. "We have years ahead of us still, decades if we're lucky, and I plan to spend every one of them showing you how much I love you." And he did. Through the passing seasons and the turning years, through the joys of watching their children grow and the challenges of aging bodies and changing times, Donovan and Priscilla remained devoted to each other. Their love, forged in crisis and tempered by hardship, only grew stronger and deeper with time. Daniel married at 21, bringing a sweet-natured woman named Emily to the family. They built their own cabin nearby and started their own family. Patricia surprised everyone by choosing to become a traveling healer, moving between the scattered mountain communities and helping those in need. David eventually became a guide, leading expeditions of Eastern tourists who wanted to experience the wilderness. But no matter where life took them, the Drake children always returned to the cabin where they had grown up, to the parents who had taught them the meaning of love, courage, and freedom. And Priscilla and Donovan welcomed them always, their home a constant refuge in an ever-changing world. On a crisp autumn day in 1901, Priscilla and Donovan sat together in the rocking chair he had made, which had grown smooth and worn from 26 years of use. They were both in their 60s now, their hair silver and their faces lined with age, but their hands still fit together perfectly, and their hearts still beat in sync. "Do you remember the first night we met?" Priscilla asked, watching leaves fall from the aspen trees around the cabin. "Every detail," Donovan said. "You were bleeding and terrified and half frozen, and you still had enough fire in you to keep running. I knew right then you were special." "I thought you were going to turn me away," Priscilla admitted. "You looked so fierce standing in that doorway." "I was fierce about protecting you, even before I knew your name." Donovan kissed her temple. "Best decision I ever made, letting you in. Best decision I ever made, knocking on your door." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently, surrounded by the mountains that had witnessed their entire story. From the terrified girl fleeing a forced marriage to the confident woman who had built a family and a legacy, Priscilla had traveled an extraordinary journey, and every step of that journey had been shared with the man who had seen her worth when she was at her lowest, who had fought for her freedom, and who had loved her without condition or reservation. As the sun set behind the peaks one more time, painting the sky in familiar colors of gold and crimson, Priscilla leaned her head against Donovan's shoulder and smiled. She had been promised to a man who beat her sister, but a mountain man had made sure she would be his instead. And in being his, she had become more fully herself than she ever could have imagined. Their story would be told for generations in the mountains, a tale of courage and love, of standing against injustice and choosing your own path. But for Priscilla and Donovan, it was simply their life, hard-won, fiercely protected, and more precious than gold. And they lived it together in love and joy until their final days.